all debaters reciting debate. And now call on the Prime Minister to open this debate.
Hello. To clarify from government that this is not a debate whether other economic systems have also worsened environmental destruction. However, this debate is only about whether capitalism as an economic system has failed the environment or not, ladies and gentlemen. Let's first define capitalism. Capitalism, when you hear of capitalism, you hear about free market economies. You hear about private property and ownership. The simple premise about capitalism is that it does not offer any restrictions on the accumulation of resources to different sectors of society. We'll agree coming from government that in modern capitalist societies, there are certain policies that aim to balance the accumulation of wealth across society, like tax systems, for example, or mandated policies that corporations should abide to. However, we think that despite these policies, the destruction of the environment is intrinsic to the very system or the very premise of capitalism. These are the standards that this debate should be judged upon. Number one, whether capitalism is approximate causality to environmental destruction. Second, whether capitalism is a tokenistic compensation to environmental reparation. I'll be proving two things in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to the first one. We think that capitalism has continuously manufactured the mindset of society towards environmental protection. If you look at it, the current narrative is we need money for us to go and protect the environment, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that this particular belief has become a luxury for many societies at the day. The belief that only countries with great tech are the only ones who could protect the environment. The belief that if I am a developing country, I could do nothing about it because environmental protection has a great cost at the end of the day. We think that this belief is primarily false at the end of the day. Why? Because capitalism commercializes environmental destruction at the end of the day. And in fact, it also commercializes environmental protection at the end of the day. If you look at status quo, green technology is so expensive because this is not only about our innate responsibility to protect the environment. Now, it has become a money-making scheme in order for us to accumulate as much resources as we want so that we could survive at the end of the day. Therefore, the initial human responsibility to protect the environment has been distorted to environmental protection being a luxury and being a cause of us accumulating as much resources as we want. This has become an opportunity to gain more economic leverage so that we could satisfy our intrinsic human ability and tendency to survive at the end of the day. So, as an implication, you stagnate the path to environmentalism even if it is possible, ladies and gentlemen. Even if it's possible for you to give green tech for free. Even if you incur so much cost onto it at the end of the day. That's why we have thoughts and doubts whether we should pursue green technology now or not, even if it's really possible. We even have thoughts of drilling for more oil, ladies and gentlemen, rather than thinking and prioritizing green technology at the end of the day. So, as a result, the idea that environmental protection has a great cost keeps humanity lax, ladies and gentlemen, even if we are capable of protecting the environment indeed. And in the time that we decide that we need to protect the environment now, environmental still has a great cost because we don't recognize that it is our innate responsibility. Rather, we fulfill our human tendencies to be greedy at the end of the day. So yes.
Look, the same can be said of any economic system that seeks to provide a supply for a human demand. If you don't intend to compare it versus those systems, how are you going to measure failure?
Here.
I don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that this debate is a comparison of any economic systems at the end of the day. This is only a measurement whether one economic system, ladies and gentlemen, has fail the standards that government has provided at the OT, and not whether socialism has also failed the environment at the OT. So let's go to the second idea that I want to present in this debate. We think that capitalism as an economic system heightens the human nature to become greedy at the OT. In the world is very scarce in resources, and humanity is incentivized to gain as much resources as it wants. This assures us that we will survive as humans, and the further incentive is we need to assure that our survival is sustainable as much as possible. We think that capitalism compels humanity to fight for their survival at all costs in this development, without realizing that survival is also dependent on maintaining the environment that we have to protect at the end of the day. So, environmental destruction now becomes a means to a greater thing that we need to uphold at the end of the day. We need to destroy our environment as what the narratives of corporations are, without necessarily trying to say that whether economic development is indeed a greater priority rather than environmental protection. For example, Shell wants to gain more against British petroleum, for example, because the competition in free market economy is so high at the end of the day. Therefore, they are willing to adopt strategies that are more environmentally destructive at the end of the day, just for them to exploit natural resources. This even goes to the extent that they cover up environmental destruction just for them to bolster their profits at the end of the day. If you look at Bodo Creek ladies in Nigeria, a particular oil company was incentivized to cover that up just for their profits to continue to be sustainable at the end of the day. So this proves and satisfies the standard that the greedy development hampers the cost of environmental destruction, and capitalism becomes a major contributor to incentivizing the greed at the end of the day. So, in a world, ladies and gentlemen, where environmental protection is an absolute necessity and is a greater value than economic development, we think that capitalism continues to blur and distort the narrative that we need to protect our environment because of our innate want to survive at the end of the day. With all these reasons, I'm proud to speak in front of you.
Generally, what government did is to put capitalism in a vacuum, enumerating the harms as if not putting a barometer in order for us to assess and measure as to what particular system will be most applicable, given that we have to trust towards development, we have to trust towards evolution, we have to trust towards progress. We think that lack in standard is actually, they will be the downfall of their side at the end of the day. They have to realize that evolution and development is not going to be for free. It will have economic costs, it will have environmental costs. In fact, because let's straightforward proven to us that in order for economic development to exist, you always have to incur costs, and that will always be in the expense of the environment. The challenge is for you to be able to reach a point where you will create minimal damage to the environment but sustain the things that you actually get in return in the things that you want to get in that particular situation. Government already failed us in doing that. But let's try to understand that but when you told us that green technology is just a lie and a fallacy that this capitalist did in order for them to generate income. In the first place, capitalists in general does not inherently possess a facet where they accumulate and get greed from all the things surrounding them. In fact, a smart capitalist would want to maximize its profits, maximize investment, and obviously, given that the raw materials and everything that they need in order to operate their businesses is entirely cut from the environment, obviously they will tend to protect the environment because without the environment, they don't have their milking cows anymore. But we have to understand that what government did here is to vaguely discuss the idea of failure. We have to concede though that capitalism has extended harms to the environment. Government cannot simply say that capitalism has harmed the environment, but tell us why it is entirely the reason why it led to the doom of the entire humanity in general. Two things that we will be discussing. First, we will be discussing about the benefits of the capitalism to the environment, but secondly, that there are existing mechanisms to protect the environment, meaning generally capitalism has led not only to the development but as well to the protection of the environment. No, thank you. We will tell you that capitalism in fact created ways in order to mitigate the effects of the environment. But secondly, even in the worst case scenario that it did create effects to the environment, we are actually, capitalism has made ways in order to solve those harms. But before I proceed, yes.
It is a fact that we cannot stop climate change and global warming right now. Is it not because of the industrialized capitalist system that we're trying to protect now?
With or without all these things that we did in capitalism, obviously the earth continues to get warm. It is a natural occurrence. What capitalism did in the process is to be able to calculate the things that we have right now. Like, is it okay for you to not develop industries that create your iPhones in order for you to have probably a cooler air in this particular room? We don't think that we will be able to sacrifice economic development in order to preserve something that eventually will still happen anyway. We think that generally what government is doing is to demonize the entire idea of capitalism without considering the fact that to some extent it has created exclusive benefits in the first place. Two things I will discuss. First, that capitalism has a neutral mechanism to limit environmental destruction, but secondly, capitalism has led to important and substantial innovations to environmental rehabilitation. And the first argument, we think that there is always a natural incentive for corporations, for entities to be able to protect the environment. Firstly, I want to protect my investment as a capitalist. I will continue to look for ways to keep it going, because without the environment, where will I get trees for me to make my pad papers? Where will I get oils, for example, to be able to operate my machineries adequately? I want to enhance my profit, meaning the raw materials that I should be using should always be calculated to such extent that I will be able to sustain my business, unless otherwise only want it to exist for a year or 4 years after the day. I want my business to be constant, because that is where I get my money. This is where I get my resources. This is where I get my means for me to be alive. And as a capitalist, I am aware as well that I couldn't continue harming the environment, because I will generally be harming the same resources of my raw materials for my operations to continue. Like, for example, in logging companies, they do not just cut trees, they also plant them so that in the near future, they will have another set of trees to cut for them to actually continue their operation. Or for example, in the industry of fishing, they will actually get fishes, but they will make sure that these particular fishes will be replaced, so that in the future, I will still be able to get the fishes to run my operation. The point is, capitalism has a self-regulating mechanism, and it regulates itself in order to ensure that it has sustainable existence in the market. It has continued existence in order to serve the people and serve the interests as well. But secondly, we will concede that capitalism and some entities that have damaged the environment, and mostly this is because of greed. This is something that government already told us that, you know what, is negligible. I've already told you why greed is not inherent, is not an inherent facet of capitalism. But capitalism is a system of supply and demand of the market. What the market demands, capitalism supplies. Obviously, given that capitalism always finds opportunities in market demand, let's now try to examine what is status quo. In status quo, you already have a failing environment. Secondly, non-renewable resources are running out. But lastly, there's a continuous threat to the long-term sustainability of these businesses. We think that generally, to the common public, this could be problems that probably harmful to the environment. But to capitalists, these are viewed as opportunities for them to be able to innovate. And the discussion of innovation plays a vital role in terms of economic development, human development, and even to protecting the environment. We think that innovation led to the discovery of green technology. It's a lie that they will tell us that green technology existed without the capitalists trying to trust and trying to fund these researchers in the first place. We think that firstly, when we talk of failing environment, the capitalists have already invented ways to save the environment, like through logging. In logging, they develop logging forests. In dynamic fishing, there are groups who facilitate cleanups. Obviously, in fact, they even help the government fund in order for the government to be able to sustain the environment and rehabilitate in the first place. But secondly, when we talk of non-renewable resources running out, we think that the capitalists have continuously searched for alternative sources for energy. And even if they do not look for it, they cannot find new sources for it, they make sure that they conserve whatever energy resources that we have right now. That's the reason why, for example, Shell developed biofuel in order for this particular oil to actually meet halfway. We compromise, we get oil, but we mix a certain compound in order for that particular consumption to be lesser detrimental to the environment, but still serving the people at the end of the day. Ultimately, capitalism capitalism forces these companies to innovate because it is the only thing that will sustain their businesses. It is the only reason why we will economically develop and obviously go and eventually lead to human development and evolution. For all those reasons and more, I'm proud to open opposition.
This debate is a debate of assessing on whether capitalism satisfies the standards of failing the environment, right? And according to Prime Minister, we have two standards in terms of it being the approximate cost of environmental destruction, and second, being the hand that actually destroys other particular individuals' perspective in society. We're going to concede that you have to strike a balance between economic development and environmental protection. But in a way, ladies and gentlemen, it is tilted. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that capitalism manufactures the perspective that you can take both at the same time, but in reality, it's more for economic development, but less for environmental protection. What we have to prove to an affirmative is that capitalism has a major role to extensively destroy environment. That's why right now, we cannot stop climate change and global warming, right? That's basically the idea of Ian when he said, wait, the earth will die anyway, so let's prioritize economic gains and let's crash destruction of the environment or the earth. We think that natural occurrences are so considerable. However, if we're going to look at it in a particular perspective, the reason why these kinds of things have been already being extreme is because of man-made forces that actually causes these kinds of problems in the very first place. We're trying to tell you that in our particular economic system, the ability of you to actually create factories is far lesser in a particular perspective of a capitalist system. So if you want me to prove that other economic system is harming less, it's true. Because at the day, there are particular social limitations at the day. Therefore, in conclusion, you have to look on how there is far greater failure in terms of capitalism. But more importantly, on second response, it is the concession that capitalism can use this particular idea as a scapegoat for their interests, ladies and gentlemen. That because the earth will die anyway, let's try to capitalize that particular opportunity to actually gain our interest and gain whatever kind of society wants us to do in the very first place. With that particular perspective, we're going to look at it that sometimes it may be genuine, but sometimes it's not. And I'll be discussing more of that later. But second response is this this idea that there is a natural incentive to protect the environment and capitalism has self-regulating mechanism. This is false. Why? Because this argumentation is dependent on the invisible hand, ladies and gentlemen, which is accurately invisible anyway. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that if you really think about it, the invisible hand pushes corporations to do things that can basically repair whatever harms they done in the very first place. However, logically, the reason why these kinds of corporations are trying to pay back the reparations is because of the concession that created so much harm to the environment. But secondly, to actually put a mask to atrocities that they've done, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. Therefore, they create or plant more trees to have more trees to be logged out in the future, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. I'll be talking a very particular idea in this debate that's very specific and actually nuanced the idea of capitalism on how it builds cultural expectation. But before I proceed, yes.
Salced's visible hand in Soviet Union has pushed farmers to use harmful fertilizers in order to increase production. What is so mutually exclusive about capitalism that creates all of these environmental harms that you're talking about?
It's the extent of destruction that we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen. You look at how they're trying to say that we are doing things for us to protect the environment, but they never consider a measurement by which a particular barometer can be a particular destructive manner to the environment, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's go to the constructive. How it breeds culture of exploitation. Because right now, the trend is oil is not necessary, for example, oil is not necessary to be looked for anymore. Because, for example, US and other oil-greedy nations have millions of barrels that can sustain up to year 2025 and 2050. But the reason why they still look for new sources of oil is because of the capitalist mindset that's drill in Scarborough, that's drill in the Arctic. Because I have to have more for me to be powerful, ladies and gentlemen. The logical implication of this is it creates a culture of oil consumption or usage of those things that can actually harm the environment. And actually, when you try to take more, because of your self-vested interest, you also try to take more in the environment, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about resources later. Therefore, we're now having a hard time to let go of oil and shift to greener tech because my capitalist society demands me to use oil, ladies and gentlemen, or those things that are actually harming the environment. As a logical extent, it creates a culture of exploitation because the consumer behaviors lead towards exploitation of natural resources and at the same time lead towards usage of highly polluting mechanisms, ladies and gentlemen. In effect, the stimuli of the capitalist system affects the decision-making calculus of society, owners, and consumers, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. Now the question therefore then becomes, how does it become the proximate cause? If we're going to look at, ladies and gentlemen, that deforestation, that there are lots of deforestation because of housing development projects, ladies and gentlemen. There are a lot of contamination of rivers in Africa because of non-regulation of these particular capitalist corporations. They're trying to mine golds for diamonds, blood diamonds in society. There are a lot of efforts to actually take more oil in other particular spaces, or even go to the Arctic, ladies and gentlemen, just for them to get what they need or what they want. This is a proximate cause. Is the reason why at the end of the day, those effects, negative environmental implications, are existent, and that's right now we already accepted the fact we cannot stop climate change or environment, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, it extends to harming the same people that you would like to protect in the very first place. The people, the environmental organization, the people on the ground, or whatever particular states that are actually greener in terms of perspective. But we're trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, that there are step-by-step processes that this particular capitalist societies and capitalist corporations are deliberately doing in society for them to get what they want and what they need, ladies and gentlemen. The limitation that they're talking about is the tax, ladies and gentlemen, are still being bypassed through the tax minimizations, ladies and gentlemen. The limitation of how they necessarily put regulation are still being bypassed because these corporations can put governments at their necks because these corporations can give money to their governments in the very first place. Therefore, that particular cultural exploitation extends on how resources in society are being scarcely diminished because of the perspective that I have to have more. And that is what's basically unique to capitalism that they cannot get, ladies and gentlemen. Because what they do is they deny the fact that sometimes your self-vested interests weigh far more to what your interests are in the very first place, but understanding the implications of your actions. For all of these reasons, we are very, very proud of this.
There's a big misconception that government is confusing something else with capitalism. What they're talking about is greed, ladies and gentlemen. What they're talking about when they're saying, I want more, I want more, I want more, that's not capitalism, that's greed. How are we sure? Because that same thinking influences other economic systems. If there is, I want more culture in socialism, socialism will be as destructive. If there's an I want more culture in communism, it will be as destructive. Because what that thought influences is the production method, not the economic system, which is why it's a big misconception. But even with the case that they gave us, we feel that government case is entering a deadlock. Because what we've told you is capitalism is self-correcting, that in the self it repairs the mistakes. But what they want to provide themselves is capitalism allowed uncontrollable greed, in the sense that it facilitated destruction. First response, why is this false? We think that the destruction of the environment is a natural occurrence. What did we mean by this? What we meant was, it's owed to the fact that they are humans and it's necessary for them to consume the environment in order to survive. If socialism saw the same need, then we think it would have also had the same damage. But we think what we can concede is with capitalism, greed was allowed to aggravate it or to make it faster, ladies and gentlemen. Which means that it's not inherently, this does not prove that it's inherently the fault of capitalism. What they're yet to prove is why capitalism was the main factor for which greed existed. They still have to prove that. But second, we think that this deadlock is disadvantageous to them. Because if it's both repairing and it's both destructive, and capitalism can be either, but that means that there is another independent variable that's causing the destruction, which one extinguishes any obligation on the part of capitalism and shifts the blame to someone else, which is human irresponsibility. They yet to prove that. What was their response? They said that the argument is dependent on an invisible hand. But what they actually wanted to say was that the self-repairing mechanism that we're saying is just companies covering up their mistakes. Why is this a misunderstanding of the argument? When we talk about capitalism, we're not discussing just one specific industry. What we're saying what we're trying to say by putting forward that is self-repairing is that if capitalism influenced one company to destroy the environment, it is also capitalism who influences another company in order to earn off the repairing of the environment. And that way we're talking about green technology, we're talking about green energy. Both of them are doing two different things to the economy, to the environment, but they are both influenced by the same economic system, which is capitalism, which what makes it one, a neutral act, but two, something that is self-repairing as a system. Is it a failure? I don't think so. But lastly, they say that this is that capitalism allowed a culture built around oil. Like for example, the capitalism built industries that are targeted towards the destruction of the environment. This is false, ladies and gentlemen. But for one, the technologies that we're using right now were gifts from the Industrial Revolution. But what he doesn't know is that markets right now are beginning to research and invest into the development of green technology because as we told you, capitalism in itself recognizes that it's not inherently sustainable, which means that there is a primary interest of capitalism devoid of any social responsibility, but as a matter of profit, to develop another source of energy, which is why it's something that we can trust for the hope of the environment because it's the same greed that will influence people to get around this culture built around oil. I already responded to this I want more argument. So what I'm going to do now is argue why capitalism ensures market shifting. Look, we have to look at capitalism for what it is. It's an economic system where capital goods are all privately owned. So in a sense, it thrives and earns on human greed, which is partly why the Industrial Revolution inflicted a lot of change. We'll proceed to that extent. But why do we think that capitalism, because of this, is not tokenistic, it's not blurry, and in fact, it's one of our biggest assurances of change and improvement? We think that green energy is a market demand already. It's at a point in history where it's transitioning from a niche market to an industry standard. Like, this is evidenced by the fact that people want it, people demand it. For example, in Europe, it's no longer a niche market. France is practically running on geothermal energy. Companies in the United States, like Unilever, for example, are trying to find production methods that use renewable energy resources, which means that it's already an existing demand method in the capitalist system. Why is this a reason for capitalism to be a hope? Because the primary requisite for capitalism to trigger, or the primary requisite for capitalism to begin exists in this circumstance. That it's presenting itself as an opportunity to earn. Because there is someone, or because there is a big enough market who's demanding earning from protecting the environment, that's a trigger for capitalism to start. Why is it a better incentive to change other than anybody else? Because it plays on one of the most carnal considerations of humans, which is greed. The fact that humans are greedy, the fact that humans are self-interested, and the fact that there is a way to be self-interested with protecting the environment is one of the biggest assurances that people will start moving towards green energy. So in that sense, capitalism is one of the biggest incentives for changing the environment because there is a way to make capitalism work in protecting the environment. Before I move on, yes.
If societies do not demand for environmental protection, what then is the incentive of capitalists to protect the environment?
That's empirically false, ladies and gentlemen. For example, the Philippines, 10% is already powered by solar energy, according to Jake. In France, the whole country is practically learning on green energy. The United States is investing in green energy. All of which are signs that people are shifting to this already. So, second argument is how should we're going to be comparative in how should we look at capitalism then? We have to look at capitalism for what it is after this debate. It's both repairing and it's both destructive. The biggest conclusion that we can deduce from both of these existing truths is that capitalism is something that's neutral, ladies and gentlemen, which can be swayed to be destructive, which can be swayed to be productive. So in a sense, what we are against in destroying the environment is human irresponsibility, ladies and gentlemen, and like for example, human greed, which means that it is a responsibility of the humans to use capitalism to solve it, which means ultimately, and as a conclusion for this debate, that it's not capitalism's fault. We don't think that capitalism has failed the earth.
For the last 10 in this debate, we would want to clarify that it's not a comparison of different economic systems in the world. It is only an assessment of capitalism, of whether or not it has failed the environment, ladies and gentlemen. So what they kept on asserting, that we have to compare whether socialism, for example, has equally damaged the environment, is irrelevant in this debate. Because even if we can see that socialism actually has equally damaged the environment, that does not discount the fact that capitalism failed the environment, ladies and gentlemen. If they're going to say that socialism actually did as much damage, that is an implicit concession that capitalism did that as well. First thing I want to discuss, and all of my rebuttals will be integrated, is how they told us that climate change and global warming and the destruction of the environment is inevitable anyway. Because from the words of leader of opposition, they told us that we can't sacrifice economic development for something that is bound to get destroyed. First response is this is an implicit concession that capitalism is willing to go to any extent of environmental destruction because anyway, the world is bound to self-destruct, right? It is an implicit concession, ladies and gentlemen, that capitalism is willing to do so much to destroy the environment. We already clarified, coming from Kuya Mikey, that we're not going to forego economic development. What we want to happen is we want to strike a balance between these two. We don't want the capitalist behavior of accumulating more and more technology, for example, more and more resources, even if it is at the expense of the environment. Sit down first. Second response is that, you know what, if natural circumstances already destroys the environment, as what they already claimed in this debate, the task therefore of humanity is to make sure that in the best case, that destruction is prevented or stopped, or at least in the worst case, it is slowed down. But what does capitalism do in status quo, ladies and gentlemen? What capitalism does is the exact opposite of this. It adds man-made destruction into the already inevitable natural destruction of the environment, ladies and gentlemen. And this is ultimately harmful because you're not slowing down the destruction of the world, but you're hurrying it even more, ladies and gentlemen. And that is exactly what the world does not want to happen right now, given the numerous scenarios of the environment getting destroyed, right? That's why this is where James' argument was particularly important when he told us that capitalism actually manufactures the mindset of society that environmental protection cannot exist without economic development, without money, ladies and gentlemen. How it commercializes environmental protection into the minds of society. Before I proceed, yes.
What we're saying is if people weren't so greedy, capitalism wouldn't do that. Your burden is not to compare, fine, your burden is to prove that things happen.
Okay, I will be responding to the greedy thing that Jason was talking about a while ago in the latter part of my speech. But let's talk about why it commercializes environmental protection, which is already clearly discussed coming from first speaker of government. Because let's discuss, why is green tech even so expensive, right? Because the people or the countries who are capable of manufacturing green technology wants to have an economic leverage in society. They want to use environmental protection, as a means to attract more profit, more leverage, more power for themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Because without this particular capitalist mindset of green, ladies and gentlemen, environmental protection would be made more accessible to people. Green technology wouldn't be as expensive, maybe. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that environmental protection is possible without, the greed that the capitalist behavior is forwarding upon society. But then the second idea of how there is a natural incentive to protect the environment. Because in the words of leader of OP again, he told us that without environmental protection, we won't have milking cows anymore, right? And this is exactly the point. The capitalist behavior, ladies and gentlemen, allows society to view the environment as only milking cows for them to profit for their own self-benefit, right? The self-regulation that they're talking about is how companies, for example, continuously plant trees so that there's more to cut in the future. Number one, this proves that the environmental protection on the part of these companies are really tokenistic. In example of taxes, for example, this gives the idea that monetary compensation is already equitable to the amount of damage that they have done to the environment. That when you plant a few trees, for example, it is already equitable to the millions of forests that you've cut down. And we think that's not true. But then secondly, this idea actually concedes to the fact that the extent of environmental protection that capitalists allow
and gentlemen, because of the capitalist behavior to acquire more and more, ladies and gentlemen, destroys the environment, and that just proves our point even more. But lastly, in terms of Jason's point of capitalism, firstly, he told us that capitalism is not equal. It does not equal to greed. But as he argued, he ultimately discussed why capitalism revolves around greed and actually heightens the human nature to be greedy, ladies and gentlemen, which is exactly what Jay was talking about when he told you why capitalism allows greed and why it heightens the natural greed of people, because they want to accumulate more and more. And this trickles down even to the individual levels. Even into the individual level. How people, our consumers, for example, keep on buying more and more things, even if these things are unnecessary to them, right? We think, ladies and gentlemen, like the behavior of U.S. consumers, for example, in terms of buying disposable things, ladies and gentlemen, has become prevalent, even if it damages the environment, right? Because according to them, because of this green tech is possible. But logically, if we try to assess it, who created the demand for green tech, ladies and gentlemen? It is the destruction of the environment that these companies ultimately allowed in the first place. But more than that, capitalism makes it hard to acquire green technology because of what I've already told you about green technology being very expensive, even if it's not supposed to be, just because of the capitalist behavior of these countries to acquire leverage. And for all of these reasons, we think that Ateneo proved why capitalism has
They
failed.
clarified to us what their problem with capitalism was. It wasn't the fact that capitalism has caused destruction. It wasn't the fact that capitalism is making the prices of all of these green technology exorbitant. They were against everything that they have done because it was tokenistic. But to begin with, what we have to examine about the protection of planet Earth is not about whether or not our protection is tokenistic to begin with. Because to begin with, the way by which we have protected Earth is not for any other reason, not for planet Earth itself, but ultimately for our survival. That's why we have to examine capitalism not in the 1700s, not in the 1800s, where capitalism was going to fuel every means of polluting planet Earth, because at that point in time, that was what greed defined. But currently, what we have to examine about greed in current society is that greed is now tantamount to survival. Because to be greedy means that we have to make sure that we have floating islands to make sure that we survive first and foremost. To be greedy is to make sure that we have sustainable natural resources from which we will have sustainable business opportunities, ladies and gentlemen. What we have to realize and what we have defended you coming from opposition side is that yes, capitalism has caused these harms before, but if we're going to examine capitalism now, it has changed because it has realized that in order to protect the private ownership of capital goods, it has to make sure that it has sustainable resources first. That's why the first issue that I want to clarify in this debate is it true that environmental destruction is inherent in capitalism? Because essentially, what government side defended in this debate was that capitalism has caused an uncontrollable extent of destruction, right? Essentially, what they did was to give us a checklist of harms of all of the things that capitalism has caused, which I will thank government side for giving us a historical lesson, right? But what we did coming from opposition side was already conceived. But what we have to say is that the extent of the harm that capitalism has caused in current society today has already lessened, because as Kian already argued to you, we have to make the most out of the resources that we have. Because obviously, land costs money. Obviously, all of the waters that we're going to acquire is going to cost money. Even all of our long-term investments are going to cost money. That's why we have to make sure that we're going to make the most out of it. That's why the smart capitalist, ladies and gentlemen, does not forward dynamite fishing, for example, or using harmful chemicals, ladies and gentlemen, because ultimately, to use all of these environmentally damaging things will make sure that all of these investments are going to be useless in the long run, ladies and gentlemen, right? That's why we say that environmental protection is an inherent part of the smart capitalist system, ladies and gentlemen. But Meg said that, well, this is only tokenistic. It doesn't really matter. But at the very least, what we're going to tell you coming from opposition side is at least capitalism creates an interest to actually make sure that the environment is protected. Even if these particular companies are only going to replant trees in order to make sure that they have new trees to harvest in the long run, at the very least, in the comparative, on our side of the house, there are trees that are planted, but without capitalism and without the innovators on government side, you wouldn't have that to begin with, right? But what they said was this: well, it's not essentially just about the companies, but the mere fact that even people on the ground level create a culture of exploitation of resources. That's why oil is now research for an alumna of ours, right? A growing population demographics of people in A, B, C, D, and E classes, ladies and gentlemen, have shown and empirically shown that there's an increasing need, ladies and gentlemen, to be environmentally friendly because as government side, the harms of the environment are already trickling down to everyone, from people of the top tier to even the bottom tier, ladies and gentlemen. That's why there's an increasing need for people, an increasing demand for environmentally friendly goods. And even companies, as we told you, coming from the opposition side, has already adapted to this. We will agree that Shell has tried, ladies and gentlemen, to drill the oil in the Arctic. But if you're going to notice, Shell has now created a new conservation mechanism by making sure that 90% of their oil, ladies and gentlemen, I mean 10% of their oil currently maintains biofuel in them in order to make sure that we're able to conserve current resources that we have and also make sure that renewable energy resources are also utilized. Which ultimately means that if capitalism adapts to market demands, given that market demands have shifted towards environmental protection, it means that capitalism naturally adapts and makes sure, ladies and gentlemen, that there is, to some extent, an environmental protection that we are affording to people. We will agree that capitalism did fuel greed. Jason already discussed that. But Meg misrepresented it because what we were telling you was that wanting more in the 1950s is different now. Because greed currently, ladies and gentlemen, is about survival and to make sure that we are first living in order to make sure that we're going to profit in the long run. Which means that if we are greedy and if capitalism fuels greed, then that greed, ladies and gentlemen, works for the ultimate good of the environment and for people on the ground level. Before I move on, yes,
That just concedes that capitalism was indeed the cause of environmental destruction in the past. Even if capitalism is tokenistically trying to make up for it now, the reason why the environment is in such a great condition right now is because of the past capitalist behavior that you yourself conceded.
here's the thing about failure. If you fail in terms of if you cheated on your partner, for instance, and you were not able to get back that person, that's when you fail. But if you're able to get back that person, you're able to succeed. That's why there's a second standard. Does capitalism fuel systems to resolve environmental problems, right? Because what they said was that capitalism stagnates the shift towards green technology because it commercializes environmental protection, i.e. it's too expensive. This is a stupid strategy for capitalists to make all of the green technology just merely exorbitant in prices. Because if something is too expensive, ladies and gentlemen, obviously it won't work much for your profit incentive because you wouldn't even be able to sell at all. Which means that under the invisible hand, these capitalist systems must be able to make sure that green technology is sold at an equilibrium price, ladies and gentlemen, because that's the only way that they're going to be able to commercialize green technology. But even if the prices of green technology is exorbitant, and we will agree to this, the exorbitant price is merely a phase, ladies and gentlemen, because the development of green technology to begin with necessitated high costs and high investments, ladies and gentlemen, which obviously the capitalist system needs to get the return of investment from. In the same manner like before, penicillin was for such an exorbitant amount and even paracetamol, but ultimately in the long run what happened is the prices eventually dropped down. We say coming from opposition side that the same thing will happen with green technology in the long run, ladies and gentlemen, when it's going to be widely distributed and when more countries are going to be able to afford it, because in the long run, when you have already recuperated our returns on investment, the prices will naturally drop down. But here's the thing, we have to be comparative in this debate. On our side, what Kian told you was that at least there was innovation, because notice that green technology was not created by states, but rather by companies, capitalist companies, ladies and gentlemen, which means that it's capitalism that created the green technology in the first place. On government side, you wouldn't even have that innovation to begin with. So if there's anyone that stagnates it, and if they're going to argue that they're going to magically create green technology, that's too late at reply. So ultimately, given that we're able to at least prevent the harms from happening, and more importantly, we're able to resolve it, capitalism has not failed.
Is a failure. So, in order to answer that, we have to use the standard that was given to us by government. Is it the cause? Look, in pinning the blame on capitalism, what they try to prove is that capitalism allowed it. But one of the biggest questions that were left unanswered in trying to prove that is, what is the exclusive feature of capitalism that makes this true? Because note, Mr. Speaker, judges, that the refusal to be comparative to other systems of economies is something that is harmful. It's a burden that they've overtly avoided this debate. They went so far to claim as it's not their burden, but in fact it is. Because only if we compare, will we see what capitalism has and what capitalism doesn't have. And only if we see what those two things, then we can start to ascertain if capitalism was really the cause or capitalism was really a failure. Which is why we don't think that they necessarily fulfill that burden. The comparison to the other systems is important in this debate because it's what made our case. We told you capitalism, socialism, communism, the three biggest economic systems in the world, have the potential to use the same harmful production methods. If all of those are true, then it's not necessarily the good conclusion to say that capitalism is a failure, but we're coming up with another conclusion. So, the new conclusion is simply that it is greed who is causing it, ladies and gentlemen. So when you look at all of the aggravated destruction of the environment, it's not entirely accurate to say that capitalism allowed it, capitalism caused it because they allowed it. Because any other economic system could allow it and then it's going to happen. So, even in that instance, how did we prove that capitalism is still in itself a good thing? Because we told you what's exclusive about capitalism is since greed can be used to repair the environment, because to be fair, Solar Philippines has very expensive solar panels. The expansion can happen faster on capitalism. Because when individuals, when people, private, greedy, not self-interested individuals have the control over capital and the development of capital, the shift towards green energy can happen at a faster rate because they don't have to wait for anybody else. Whereas you compare it to socialism and communism, one, the change might be slow because, for example, for Stalin, for so long as it works, it works. There might not even be an incentive for change. So, since the decision to destroy the environment or not is something that's heavily influenced by greed, capitalism doesn't fail the environment because capitalism provides the opportunity to make good use of that greed. Look, Mr. Speaker, I'm no stranger to failure. I'm sure that I've experienced it so many times and probably will a lot more times in the future. But to the average reasonable person, failure is negative because failure is entirely negative. We don't say that people fail when they're doing something to repair their mistakes because it's natural to make those mistakes. So in a sense, that's what are the clearest definition of failure that the average reasonable person has. In that sense, capitalism is not a failure because we're willing to admit that capitalism has made its mistakes. But in repairing those mistakes, capitalism offers the clearest way how to do it. It's not tokenistic, it's good reparations. That's why capitalism is not a failure.
Parallelism of Mikey in terms of cheating partners. Because she said that when you cheated, you already failed your partner, right? But however, when you get her back, you're successful now. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that parallelism already conceived that you already failed in the past. It's just that's the reason why we have so much trust issues right now with the partners, because you failed to actually protect the trust he or she gave you in the very first days. Second parallelism, failing in an exam. You look at it, when you failed your past exam, you can get back to another exam. But it doesn't discount the fact that you still failed your past exams, right? We think, ladies and gentlemen, that the idea of failing is something that is actually, it's existent in terms of how your particular actions cause a particular effect in your life in the future. Even if you do something about it, a part of your life was a failure. I know that's so sad. However, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about how they try to look at how the context or analysis of capitalism. Or how capitalism is just so fine, it has so many regulations, self-correcting mechanisms and regulations. That's why capitalism just adapts to market demand. However, I fail to see that in status quo right now, because the last time I checked, capitalism created the market demand, ladies and gentlemen, for you to actually assess or for you to actually gain that particular interest that you would like to actually get in the very first place. That's why when they actually created this particular atrocious to the environment, the same reason why they're creating the greener technology is because of the fact that this particular atrocities that they've done are the creation of the market demand of greener technologies. I think that is particularly clear. Now, why do we think that affirmative should win this debate? Because we think the process in terms of team stance. Because we think, ladies and gentlemen, that in the very first place, we told you that this isn't a debate or comparison of economic system. Although, we still bite the bullet it and try to compare socialism and try to still say, but even if they're the same, or if they're not the same, there are particular differences of capitalism created. But more importantly, which team is more cohesive? Because the thing, ladies and gentlemen, the process in terms of the tension of the characterization of capitalism. With ladies and gentlemen, when Jason entered this debate, the process explicitly said that capitalism is not equal to greed. But at the latter part of his speech, he was talking about how, because of capitalism, or because of that greed, capitalism is now more likely to protect the environment, etc., etc. We think, which is switch, ladies and gentlemen. This thought process and how that particular value can affect your analysis of your particular reaping of benefits in the very first place. And I think that is attention that we have to look at in the very first place. But more importantly, in terms of responses, because the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, when Mikey talked about the phases of market systems and strategy, it was too late. Ladies and gentlemen, the trial process on how the prices is basically assessed on how oil before has relatively the same price with what we have right now, ladies and gentlemen. Notwithstanding the fact that we have inflation. If you're going to remove inflation, ladies and gentlemen, it's still the same. Therefore, it is actually so expensive right now, in connection to greener technology, it will still be the same because of the market demand that capitalism created, ladies and gentlemen. These are the same things that we're trying to prevent because of how capitalism tries to bypass the mindset of individuals, the mindset of corporations, the mindset of governments and society in the very first place. And we think, ladies and gentlemen, that behavior of capitalism is something that already failed the environment, that really in the very first place they want to protect the environment, but in fact their actions are actually doing things that are actually harming or destroying the environment. For all of these reasons, I'm very, very, very proud to propose.
Thanks very much.